that's me. Okay guys, I have to admit, the artwork that Gabbie has been posting recently is like really good. But since Gabbie has stepped back from social media and stopped posting her regular YouTube content as we know it and just kind of started focusing on her music and her art, that's when I really started to see the growth for her as an artist. I have made full videos on a different channel before I made this one, critiquing Gabbie's art. You know, when she first came out with Dandelion, I critiqued her illustrations in that book. I critiqued some watercolor paintings that she showed us. And of course, before that, she did co-illustrate her first poetry book, Adultolescence, and I say co-illustrate because some of the illustrations in that book are actually by her sisters, if you didn't know that. But before the release of Adultolescence, we didn't really see Gabbie trying to be an artist, because 2017, that was kind of her peak of being a YouTube creator, and she was focusing on her YouTube content, and she also started getting into music. That's when she released her Out Loud music video as well. So because at that point in her career, when she was focusing on YouTube, we didn't really see much from her as a traditional artist like we're seeing now. Not that she shared publicly, at least. So what I want to do here is just really dive into the history and the evolution of Gabbie Hanna as an artist, as a visual artist specifically. But when I do that, I will definitely not be ignoring all the mistakes that she made and all the scandals and controversies that came from her in her art career, including her copying other art, tracing art, sometimes cutting corners and focusing on quantity over quality, calling out other artists by name, and calling her docuseries art. You know, the docuseries that was supposed to like expose a whole ton of people that she deleted and never talked about again. Yeah, she tried calling that art, and I fully disagree with that, but we'll get into that later. So usually at this point in the video, I kind of explain what I'm drawing for you on the screen, but today I'm not drawing anything on the screen because, you know what, I wanted to sit down and talk to you guys on the camera. You know, I've only done this maybe once or twice before, but I hope you enjoy it. I hope you like seeing my face. But even so, as always, I do invite you to grab a sketchbook and draw with me while we chat and hang out. But yeah, you can send me your art at PaintandSipYT on Instagram or Twitter, or on my subreddit r/PaintandSipYT. And I love sharing the art that you guys send me on my videos. So here is a beautiful little horse sketch by Shauna Draws on Instagram. So go follow them if you want more art on your feed. And finally, before getting started, I would like to thank Jasmine, Maury, Fabian, Teal, and Evie for supporting me on Patreon. It really means so much, but you know that because I tell you all the time. And it does really help me out as a small artist. And if there is anybody else out there who would like to support me and get some fun art benefits like coloring pages, stickers, and thank you cards sent to you in the mail, my Patreon is linked down below. And with that, I'm ready to get started if you are. So again, the first look that the public really got to see of Gabbie's art was in her illustrations in her book Adultolescence, released in 2017. And the book was really heavily criticized by the internet in general because of the poetry. The poetry was not A+ level poetry, putting it in a nice way. But what do I know? I don't even read books. I don't know what good poetry is, but this is about art, not poetry. But since the poetry was super analyzed, super criticized, the illustrations kind of went under the radar as far as I could tell anyway. Even I didn't really look at the illustrations, and in 2017 I was fully in college for art and still fully a fan of Gabbie, and I didn't put two and two together and decide to, you know, do an art critique. The illustrations, they just weren't as popular to look at compared to the poetry. But when criticism did come in the form of art critiques for Adultolescence, it was from people saying that, you know, there was kind of like an awkwardness to the illustrations, or almost like childlike methods used to illustrate the poems. Like with this illustration, for example, looking at it, you might think this artist didn't really know the basics of bodily anatomy when it came to figure drawing and drawing people. It was very stiff. It was drawn in kind of a way as if like you could tell the artist was drawing a person from memory, again without any like prior knowledge of figure drawing. Or like this eye that to me is very reminiscent of the eye that literally every single one of us drew on our notes in elementary school. But from that, Gabbie addressed the criticism of her poetry by saying that it was supposed to be written from like a child's perspective almost. And she didn't address the criticism of her illustrations specifically, as far as I know, but I'm sure, just taking an educated guess here, she would have a similar explanation for her illustrations. But that's just my thoughts on the illustrations for Adultolescence, which again kind of exemplifies Gabbie's early career as an artist as far as we could see as the public. But I know that a lot of the art in Adultolescence is not her best work, and I know that because the cover of the book shows exactly what kind of artist she could have been on every page of that book. The cover is amazing. It is so well done. It has so much like variety of details. So then why did so many of the pages in the book fall flat? Quantity over quality. That's what I think happened. Now, following Adultolescence, there was kind of a couple years in between where Gabbie wasn't really doing a lot of traditional art again. She was focusing on YouTube and making music videos, but in 2020 came Gabbie's second poetry book, Dandelion. And during the promotion for this book, Gabbie actually debuted some of her watercolor paintings that she would be giving away as prints for a Patreon promotion involving Dandelion. And these for me were the first ever pieces of traditional art that I ever saw from Gabbie, and I was so excited to sit down and film a video critiquing these paintings. Because although I thought they were really good and I was super excited to see this from her, there were some things that I thought could have been improved. And I said what I thought could have been improved. I just want to say my first impression, I don't think these watercolor paintings are very developed. So although I didn't think these paintings were very developed and I thought there could have been a lot of learning from the watercolor technique, there could have been more highlights and shadows being pushed, I recommended perhaps using gouache instead because of the techniques that she was trying to use. But other than that, I was still very excited to see this because again, before this, all we had seen from Gabbie was digital art only. Again, although I did have critiques for this, this is a huge step, seeing somebody try a new technique and sharing their technique and being open about it, especially because these paintings were not for profit. They were just to share and to give away for free to promote her book. And I also really commend Gabbie at this time for being so open to the criticism that I provided to her about her watercolor painting techniques. She watched that video that I just showed a clip of, she took it very well, and she even expressed that she was open to trying the techniques that I suggested. But even though my criticism was taken well, I cannot say the same for others later on, and again, we'll get there. Then of course, as the timeline goes, the official release date for Dandelion came, and I did get my own copy of the book and I analyzed the illustrations in it, Rachel Oates style, only instead of analyzing the poetry, I analyzed the drawings. At the time, I was a little bit disappointed in what I was seeing. I did give some compliments, but there was a lot of things that I really wanted to see improvement on. For example, there was like this illustration here where I really wanted the font to be handwritten. I showed this other example where the font was actually typed out, but it made sense. And then I showed this other example where she did actually write this handwritten font out by hand, and I thought that this was a good technique, and I wish that she would have done this with the first illustration I showed. But although I stand by everything I said in that video, now looking back, it was so much better than Adultolescence overall, the illustrations. I mean, because the illustrations in Dandelion were just overall so much better than Adultolescence, because the illustrations in Adultolescence were, you know, they're very kind of basic, simple line work. We saw a little bit of, you know, hatching and cross-hatching, but just like at a very basic level. In Dandelion, however, we saw that really take a step up. We saw stippling, we saw hatching, we saw cross-hatching, we saw all these different line thicknesses, and there was just so much variety in so many of the Dandelion illustrations. You can just really tell that Gabbie became a much better artist during the years in between the releases of her two books. And I also want to talk about during this era, during the promotion of Dandelion, Gabbie participated in an interview where she was asked about her future as an artist. She was asked about if she would ever sell actual paintings, and in this interview she talked about how she's not really open to selling her paintings at that point because she didn't feel like she was a good enough painter to try to sell them. But she was open to perhaps practicing with painting and practicing with traditional media and being open to selling it in the future. And she also talked about, this is something I want to emphasize, because she also talked about how she wanted to perhaps start a clothing line later on with her illustrations, and she wanted to get into graphic design. And I noted back then when she said that, I said, I want to see her do paintings, do traditional art, and use that to make clothing, to make other things. And what is Gabbie doing now? She's making merch with her traditional paintings. She's making album art with her traditional paintings, and I really, really, really love that. And besides that, her paintings today, her original traditional art, her album covers, the paintings that she's just making for fun and sharing on Twitter and Instagram, they're so uniquely Gabbie. Like, I cannot see any other artist in these paintings. These earlier illustrations for her poetry books, I could tell that she was trying to emulate other artists, but today her paintings are just so original and I love it. But with growth comes mistakes, many mistakes, bad, very bad mistakes, disappointing mistakes. And as a fan of Gabbie's art, I really mean that. I want to start off light as we can start and talk about some tracing arguments. Some people called her out for tracing. They think that she traced her illustrations, and nobody can prove that. So I'm not going to analyze that, but we do know that for quality reasons, Gabbie actually did trace some of her sister's art for the book, Adultolescence. It is a fact that some of the illustrations in Adultolescence were original works actually submitted by her sisters. But last year, one of Gabbie's sisters actually came out and said, hey, this work of art right here, it's mine, and I was never properly credited for it. And this was eventually somewhat resolved when the sister did realize that Gabbie did include a dedication in Dandelion, thanking her sisters for the art that they contributed to Adultolescence. But nevertheless, the original artist did wish that it was kind of solved better in the first place anyway. And I do have a full video on that. If you'd like to know the details, I'll link it below. And the next situation, the next mistake in Gabbie's art career that I want to remind the audience of, I'm sure we haven't really forgotten though, was Gabbie's angry Instagram rants where she specifically called out fellow creators, Angelica Oles and Rachel Oates, among other people, calling them all sorts of nasty names, sending her angry fans their way. They got their Instagrams reported. It was a mess. And I really hate how she treated her fellow artists, because Rachel is an artist. But one thing that really stood out to me was something that Gabbie specifically said toward Rachel in this public Instagram rant. Gabbie said, Rachel is not an artist, so Gabbie does not care about her opinion because Rachel has no accomplishments in art or has proven to Gabbie that she is actually intellectual enough to understand art. That Gabbie only accepts criticism from talented, smart people and not bullies on YouTube. This is literally straight up wrong because Rachel, in literally every sense, is an artist, literally. Did I say literally enough? She makes art, she sells art, she has a website with her art, she has an art YouTube channel. So essentially, Gabbie spewed lies about Rachel, saying she wasn't an artist, saying she wasn't intellectual enough to understand art, keeping my cool, and degraded Rachel as a fellow artist simply because Gabbie didn't like the criticism that Rachel had to offer about her poetry in the past. Artists don't do that to other artists, Gabbie. I'm sorry. I can't get over that. Like, your art is good. Really good, but it's hard for me to say that now that I just worked myself up again and reminded myself of that. I'm angry at you again. Sorry. And last, and probably the worst, Gabbie tried to describe her infamous expose series as art. You know, the series that hurt a bunch of people, brought people into situations they did not want to be brought up in, made people relive situations they did not want to relive. You know, that series? Yeah, she tried calling that art.
Is like nobody's really watching the series the way I wanted it to be watched, which is kind of a bummer, but just something I sort of have to accept because I definitely saw it as more of like an art piece of like self-expression.
I had a lot of thoughts about that. I had a lot of thoughts about, you know, performance art, comparing it to other artists who are controversial for reasons, and there's a whole video I made about that too. Really recommend it, in the description. That behavior really stunted her growth as an artist because even though she is doing so well, improving her techniques, learning new techniques, becoming a better traditional artist, it's really hard to separate art from the artist when she's displaying these kind of behaviors. And that's where she fails, in my opinion. Like, she's a good artist, but she's not good at being a good artist. I hope that makes sense. But what I can commend her on is discontinuing the series deleting it, deleting everything off her channel that doesn't have to do with her and her new focus of art and music. And I'm really happy that she's just using her social media now just to promote herself and just to create things. And I am open to seeing how successful she may become as an artist in the future. So friends, remember to tag me in your art, follow me on social media. I want to see what you made with me today, if you made anything, and if you didn't, you should follow me anyway. And with that, I hate outros, so okay, bye.